Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
After very disappointing local election results, Labour has a new and cunning plan. According to yesterday's Guardian, the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell is to be deployed to reveal more about his values and his personal story. Sounds intriguing, and the man himself is here. Before we get on to that...
I don't know where that story came from, but there you are.
The Guardian. Anyway, let me ask you, first of all, about the local elections, because you said that the results were mixed. They were mixed between bad and very bad.
They were disappointed. They were really disappointed, of course they were. We fought hard, and there were some mixed results. There weren't in some areas, you know, like in Manchester and Liverpool, and even down in Bristol in the southwest of England, we did pretty well. And also in Wales, it wasn't as bad, but it was disappointing. Of course it was.
And who is to blame for this?
Well, I think we've got a period of time now in which I think we've not been able to get our policies across. Partly that's the media, I have to say, I have to be straight about that. But also, our campaigning has also now, I think with a united party, our campaigning has got to step up a notch. So, you know, the general election starts now. Local government elections are over, now it's the general election. In broadcasting terms, we get more balanced coverage in terms of a general election campaign. It gives us the opportunity to put our ideas across, and also it gives the opportunity to people to learn more about Jeremy Corbyn as our leader as well.
And you think the more they see him, the more they'll like him, because that is not the evidence so far.
Well, I think it's important in a general election, in a democracy like this, it's important you put your policies out there straightforwardly, but also you show what type of person you are. That's why I want this debate between Jeremy and Theresa May, and I don't understand why she's running from it. If we can have a debate in France between the two leaders for the presidency, that's standing today, why can't we here? And I think if they do see more of Jeremy, they'll see the honest and decent person that he is, but also the strength he has.
Shouldn't he do a debate with the other leaders in that case?
Well, we'll see. I think it's important that Theresa May...
So he might?
Well, let's see. I want Theresa May to respond to this, because the reality is, whoever's going to be Prime Minister of this country after June the 8th, it's either going to be Jeremy Corbyn or Theresa May. It's going to be one of the two major parties. We need her to actually say, look, I will debate this. What is wrong with that? Why? We're a democracy, for goodness sake.
Because another reason about what's gone wrong for your party was given by yourself a few years ago. You said it is unarguable that no party leader can win an election if behind in the polls on economic competence, you said. Now, you're way behind on the polls. They're 40%, you're 17%. And up to a point, you must take personal responsibility
for that. Of course, look, we've been behind in the polls on economic credibility ever since the economic crash in 2007, 2008, and that's happened to most political parties that were in power at that point in time, whoever's been Shadow Chancellor. However, of course, I have a responsibility.
You've had 18 months to get your message
over. Yes, that's right, and we've been trying to, and that's why in this general election campaign, I think there's a real opportunity now for getting that message across about how we will manage the economy in the future.
And your message today is that if you earn £80,000 or more a year, you'll be paying more in tax, but if you don't, you'll be paying no more.
But what we're saying today, anyone earning below £80,000 will be guaranteeing you will not have an increase in income tax or VAT or national insurance contributions. And for those above £80,000, we're asking them to pay a modest bit more. Why? To fund our public services. You had Theresa May on last week, Andrew. If I just make this point, you put that very good question to her about nurses. 11% cut in wages over the last 7 years, some of them having to go to food banks, our nurses. That cannot be right. So we're going to ask those higher earners just to pay a bit more.
Are we talking about a new rate of tax, because the 45p rate and then the 50p rate possibly under Labour?
What will happen over this next week is that the Labour Party, the Democratic Party, will be consolidating and confirming our manifesto. We'll launch it the week after next, and then we'll identify the very specifics of this. But I wanted people to...
But you've said very clearly that people over £80,000 a year will be paying more.
A bit more, a modest bit more. Well, let me say this. The reason I'm saying this, because I want middle and lower earners to be assured that under Labour they will not be paying more taxes, because I've seen some of these ludicrous figures that the Tories have been bandying about, and I wanted them to have that assurance.
And you say a little bit more, so that John McDonnell, who used to want people paying over £100,000 to be paying 60%, has changed his mind.
I don't want to preempt any decisions that will be made within the democratic process of the Labour Party. You'll see it will be a modest increase.
A modest increase.
But it will go, I'll tell you where it will go, to our education services, our caring services and our NHS. They're desperately in need. And I hope when Jeremy Hunt comes on, you'll ask him these questions.
Well, I have lots of questions for him.
Well,
but can I ask you about, again, the policy for people earning £150,000, much richer off? Is that still to return to the 50% tax band for them?
You'll see... I'm sorry to argue in this way or respond this way, but we have a democratic process in the Labour Party. This next week will determine that level, and then the following week the manifesto will be there. And what I'll be doing, just to be certain, I will be identifying for each policy the costing of that policy and the funding source.
How are you going to pay for it?
But the assurance I'm giving all the way through is that middle and lower earners will not have their taxes increased. And there'll be no stealth taxes either.
Can I ask you about the stealth taxes in that case? Because you haven't specifically ruled out a rise in employers' national insurance.
No, there's no plans to do that. I've never even mentioned that in the past. I haven't done
That's
that.
the reason you didn't mention it was why people were suspicious.
OK, well, let me allay their suspicions. That isn't happening.
Not happening. And VAT, what about zero-rated items? Are you going to extend the rate of VAT over other areas? You said you won't raise the rate of VAT, but the extent of VAT.
We've no plans to do that. The only exception we made for that, if you remember, was we announced a couple of weeks ago this issue about private school fees, where we want to put VAT on that, and then we're going to use that to afford free school meals for all children. And I think that's fair.
One final tax question. We've got the Sunday Times rich list today. Very, very rich people indeed. Are you attracted at all by the idea of a wealth tax on the very richest?
Look, I'm quite shocked all the time about the inequalities within our society that we have. And somehow we've got to address that. And we'll be bringing forward ideas around that, both in terms of inequalities of wealth, but also inequalities of pay.
So wealth tax is possible?
No, we're talking about individual areas which will come forward. And every item of policy that we will be identified will cost, and then at the same time we'll identify the funding source. But we're talking about making sure our public services are properly funded. And it is about, we're not talking about hitting people hard, we're talking about modest increases so that we can actually have a society which we believe everyone shares the benefits of.
How much money do you intend to borrow over the next 10 years?
Right, OK. What we've been saying is we're basically saying in our capital programme, we're having £250 billion worth of investments, that's about £25 billion a year of that 10-year period, to put into the upgrading of our infrastructure. Look, I want to make, this
is a lot of borrowing and tax rises.
Well, look,
some people will say this is going back to the 1970s.
Shall I tell you whose advice we took in terms of borrowing? Philip Hammond. He said last year, actually, we need to borrow for our infrastructure, and now's the time to do it. And also, we took the figures from the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, about how much exactly is needed if we're going to be competitive with our European and American competitors. And if you look what Trump is doing, he's putting $1 trillion in.
You are applying to be the second most important person in the country, and you are going to be the first Marxist chancellor this country has ever had in modern times. How is that going to affect the way we go?
I'm going to be the first socialist in the tradition of the Labour Party. And what that means, it's going to be rooted, let me just finish, it's going to be rooted in Labour Party values. And what are they? Fairness and equality, but making sure that there is a democratic decision taken at every stage. So that means I will be including in the economic development process of our country businesses and trade unions and communities, local government, elected mayors, and we will determine together the future of our country. It will not be done by private lobbyists behind closed doors as it is under this government at the moment.
The only reason I use the Marxist word is that you yourself have said again and again and again, I'm clear, I'm an unapologetic Marxist.
No.
You don't say it on TV shows, but you say it in obscure places like the House of Commons.
What I say, obscure places, they say whisper a secret in the House of Commons, no one hears it. But look, the issue there is in the strong tradition of the Labour Party, which takes into account all of those economic thinkers, of course they do. And what I'm saying is the democratic decision-making about the future of our economy will be open and transparent, but will be inclusive. No longer will it be done by private lobbyists. It will be done by involving both sides of industry, and it'll be involved in elected mayors, local democracy, local committees.
So a very, very clear, simple question. Are you a Marxist?
Right. I believe there's a lot to learn.
No or a yes? I couldn't work it out.
Well, I tell you, I believe there's a lot to learn from reading Capital. Yes, of course it is, because that's been recommended not just by me but many others, mainstream economists as well. But I also believe in the long tradition of the Labour Party, which involves people like G.D.H. Cole, Tawney and others. You put that all together and you have, I think, a direction for our economy based upon sound principles of fairness.
Now, looking at, you mentioned Das Kapital there, and the great prediction in Capital, which you have yourself raised, is that capitalism as a system will come down with an enormous crash. There'll be a crisis and the entire system will fail. And you have said...
That's where Marx got it wrong, didn't it? That's where Marx got it wrong.
Because you yourself have said that you don't just simply want to replace the government, you want to bring down the system.
I want to transform.
Do you still want to bring down the system?
I want to transform the system. That's where Marx got it wrong. We know that.
So you don't want to destroy the capitalist system?
I want to transform the system. I'll tell you how I want to transform it. I want to transform it in a way in which we have a prosperous economy, but where that prosperity is shared by all, where it's economically sustainable, but environmentally sustainable as well.
So you're no longer looking for a revolutionary moment?
I'm looking for a transformative government, and which will, like the Attlee government, which transformed our society, will lay the foundations for a prosperous economy, where our country is richer, but where everybody shares in those riches.
Now, we don't know what's going to happen in this election campaign. You may do very well, and you may win this election campaign. But if you don't, you in the past have been very clear to me that both you and Jeremy Corbyn would then have to stand down. Do you still agree with that?
Well, I'm not working on wild hypotheticals. We're out there to fight for every vote. It's interesting, over the last week, there's been a rush of young people registering to vote.
You won't do hypotheticals.
Well, let me just finish this sentence. There's been a rush of young people to vote. I think this is going to be young people's election as much as anything. I think that we're in there with a real fight. We know how tough it is, but when it's tough, that's when the Labour Party comes out fighting and will, I believe, win this election.
OK, well, let me just remind you about what you said to me on that same subject not so long ago. Your critics think you can't win that election. If they're proved right and you do badly in that election and don't win it, will both of you resign?
Well, that would be inevitable, wouldn't it?
It would be inevitable if you resign.
Of course it would. Every Labour leader who loses an election usually goes.
And do you still agree with that?
Well, I think we're going to win this election, full stop.
But you said it was inevitable if you didn't.
I'm fighting to win this election, as are our 500,000 members out there. We're not contemplating any loss. We're going to win the votes and we're going to win this election. Why? Because our country needs us.
John McDonnell, thanks very much for coming to talk to us.
Labour has said it wants John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, to play a more prominent role in the Labour campaign, and he was on the Andrew Marr show this morning. He was asked if he was a Marxist, and he denied that he was. That slightly surprised me, because I'd seen tape from before saying not only that he was, but he was rather proud of it. So let's just have a look at now and then.
Are you a Marxist?
Right. I believe there's a lot to learn.
No or a yes? I couldn't work it out.
Well, I tell you, I believe there's a lot to learn from reading Capital. Yes, of course it is, because that's been recommended not just by me but many others, mainstream economists as well. But I also believe in the long tradition of the Labour Party. We've got to demand systemic change. I'm honest with people. I'm a Marxist. You know, this is a classic crisis of the economy, classic capitalist crisis. I've been waiting for this for a generation.
That second clip, we think, was about 4 years ago. No, I'm not a Marxist. Yes, I am a Marxist. I've been waiting for the Marxist revolution his whole life. Does this sort of thing matter?
Yes, although in fairness to McDonnell, I think he's a really good interviewee of this shadow cabinet of untested figures in a national campaign. None of them have ever been exposed on any level to a sort of national media campaign they're all about to experience. He, I think, is the best interviewee. In terms of this, in fairness to him, when he gave that clip 4 years ago, I bet he never dreamt that he would be in this senior front bench position. But their background is clear. They are of the left that I think they would have all described. Jeremy Corbyn probably would have done, although I think he's close to being a sort of Tony Bennite. And so there are about 4 Labour campaigns being fought in this election. There's their campaign, there's the old shadow cabinet who are out campaigning in constituencies but not identifying with that campaign. There's the former Labour leader Tony Blair, and it's
Is it damaging or not?
Oh, I think it is damaging. If they could be damaged any further, I could just see all the Labour MPs with their heads in their hands. I mean, what I'm hearing from Labour MPs is that there is not one of them that doesn't feel they have a horrendous battle on their hands. And these are going to be very individual local campaigns where local MPs are winning despite the party leadership, not because of it.
Let's turn to Labour's big campaign announcement today. That was the promise of no income tax rises for those earning less than £80,000, which of course means those earning more could face an increase. But by how much? Here's the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, on the BBC earlier.
But what we're saying today, anyone earning below £80,000 will be guaranteeing you will not have an increase in income tax or VAT or national insurance contributions. And for those above 80,000, we're asking them to pay a modest bit more. Why? To fund our public services, a modest bit more. Well, let me say this, you'll see it will be a modest increase. We're talking about modest increases so that we can actually have a society which we believe everyone shares the benefits of.
And we're joined now by the Shadow Justice Secretary, Richard Bergen. He's in Leeds. Good morning to you.
How are you doing?
Mr. McDonnell stressed that for those earning over 80,000, they would be paying more, but it would be modest. He used the word modest, I think, about 4 or 5 times. But there's only about 1.2 million of them. So if it's too modest, you won't raise much money, will you?
Well, what this policy is about, the key part of this policy, it's a tax policy for the many, not the few. We're saying that low earners and middle earners won't be paying more tax under a Labour government, and that's not a policy that the Conservatives have committed to yet. But as John McDonnell also said in his interview earlier, if there is a tax rise on the top 5% of earners, those earning over £80,000, it would be a modest rise.
He said that. I'm just trying to work out what that would mean in terms of money, because, as I say, if it's too modest, you don't raise much.
Well, what will happen is that the Labour Party's manifesto will be published in the next couple of weeks, and in there it will be fully set out, costed, and I'm afraid I can't make an announcement now on this show about that. Happy to come back and do it,
I feared that would be the case. I'll be patient. Let me come on to the local elections then. Mr. Corbyn said he's, quote, closing the gap with the Tories. What evidence is there for that?
Well, John Curtis on your programme just now said that there was an 11% gap in the results, Labour being 11% behind, whereas the polls before that suggested Labour were anything up to 20% behind. But was it a great day for Labour? Certainly not. Is there a lot of work to be done between now and June the 8th? Very much so, but we're relishing every moment of that.
But the Tories, comparing like with like, comparing the equivalent elections in 2013, the Tories increased their share of the vote by 13 percentage points. You lost 2 percentage points, so that's a net, you're on the wrong end of 15 percentage points. In what way is that closing the gap?
Well, we've gone down to 11 points behind. Am I satisfied with that? Certainly not. Is the Labour Party satisfied with that? Certainly not. They say a week's a long time in politics. 4 or 5 weeks is an even longer time in politics, and we've got a job to do now. The local elections are over, the general election campaign is starting, and we want to put out there the policies that will improve the lives of low and middle income earners, and also many people who consider themselves to be well off as well.
You lost 133 seats in Scotland. Are you closing the gap in Scotland?
Well, the journey back for Labour in Scotland, I always thought, and the Labour Party always thought, wouldn't be an easy one. Since the council election results in Scotland that we're comparing this to, there has been the independence referendum and, of course, the terrible results for Labour in the 2015 general election. So it is a challenge, but it's a challenge that hundreds of thousands of Labour members are determined to meet, and that's why we're out campaigning, talking to people about Labour's bread and butter policies that will make people's lives better.
All right. These local elections took place mid-term. Normally, mid-term is the worst time for a government. And a good time for the opposition. That is a feature of British politics. So why did you lose 382 councillors in a mid-term election?
Well, as I say, and as Andy Burnham said when he gave his acceptance speech after his terrific first ballot result win in Manchester, it was an evening of mixed results for Labour.
Well, it was generally bad mix, wasn't it? I mean, why did you lose all these councillors mid-term?
Well, it's not a welcome result for Labour, and of course I'm not going to be deluded and say it's some sort of triumph. What I'm focusing on, and what the Labour Party is focusing on, is the next 4 weeks and how we're going to put across policies like free school meals for all primary school children, £10 an hour minimum wage, the pledge not to increase tax for low and middle earners. That's 95% of earners in this country, and saving our NHS from privatisation and funding it properly. These are just some of the policies, including, by the way, a boost in carers allowance, that will make the lives of people in Britain better off. And that's what the Labour Party is about. We're for the many, not for the few.
And what people also like of their political parties that aspire to be in government is to be united, and for people to be singing from the same song sheet among the leaders. And you mentioned Andy Burnham. Why did Mr. Burnham not join Mr. Corbyn when Mr. Corbyn went to the rally in Manchester on Friday to celebrate Mr. Burnham's victory?
Well, first of all, Andy Burnham did a radio interview straight after his great victory in which he said that Jeremy Corbyn helped him to win votes in that election. But secondly, as to the reason...
Why didn't he turn up?
As to the reason that Andy Burnham wasn't there at an outdoor meeting that Jeremy was doing in Manchester, let me give you the reason if that's okay. It's because I understand Andy was booked in to celebrate his victory with his family that night. I don't begrudge him that, and I hope you don't either. I think it was well deserved.
Surely you would go, and so your leader has made the effort to travel to Manchester to celebrate one of the few victories you enjoyed on Thursday. Surely you would go and join the leader and celebrate together.
Well, I don't begrudge, and I'm sure you don't either, Andy Burnham having a nice time with his family that night after he'd made it clear that Jeremy Corbyn had assisted him in that great victory in Manchester.
I can see from the look on your face you're not quite convincing yourself.
I am convinced.
You talked about policies and how you have to convince people, and I understand that, and so on. But the outgoing Labour leader in Derbyshire, David Wilcox, he lost his seat on Thursday. You lost Derbyshire, which was a surprise in itself. He said that genuine party supporters said they were not voting Labour while you have Jeremy Corbyn as leader. Are you hearing that on the doorstep too?
Well, I've been knocking on hundreds of doors this week. I've been in my constituency, I've been elsewhere. And of course, you never get it where every single voter thinks the leader of any particular political party is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But it's only on a minority of doorsteps that people are criticising the Labour leader. Most people aren't even talking about these kind of questions. Most people whose doors I knock on are talking about Jeremy Corbyn's policies, as I've mentioned, free primary school meals, £10 an hour minimum wage, also policies such as paternity pay, maternity pay and sick pay for the self-employed who've been hard-pressed under this government. Right. So I don't recognise that picture of despondency, but I do understand that in different areas, in local elections, the perspectives are different, because that's why the local elections...
I mean, that was Derbyshire. The Labour leader, again outgoing, of Notts County Council, said that there was concern on the doorstep about whether Jeremy Corbyn was the right person to lead the Labour Party. And even Steve Rotherham, very loyal to Mr Corbyn, won the mayoral contest in Liverpool. He said the Labour leader was, quote, Marmite on the doorstep. Doesn't that explain some of your performance on Thursday?
Well, we're talking about moving forward. Now, I am confident that in the next 4 weeks, when we're getting the coverage on television, that people will see further the kind of leadership, the open leadership that Jeremy provides, in contrast to Theresa May's refusal to meet ordinary people. She came to my constituency, I don't think met a single person who lives in my constituency, and also she's ducking the chance to debate with Jeremy Corbyn on television. She should do it and then let the people decide. I don't know why she won't.
Just one final question, Mr Bergen. The Labour mantras for the many, not the few, that you are the party of ordinary people and so on. Why is it the case then that among what advertisers call C2s, Ds and Es, those who learn average or below average income, how come you barely have a lead in the polls even among that particular social group? Why is that?
Well, our policies to assist in protecting and improving the living standards of people in that group, and our policies to protect and advance the living standards of the majority in our society.
But they don't seem to be convinced.
Well, we've got 4 weeks to convince them. Okay. We're enjoying trying to convince them, and I believe we will.
All right, Mr Bergen, thank you for coming on the programme.
Thank you very much.
That was Labour.